Hello and welcome to Cool Coffee with Kansas Principals. By and for school administrators, this podcast is intended to promote candid discussion and insight about our great profession. My name is Rick Sola, and as Communications Director for the Kansas Principals Association, I am the host, but I am certainly not the feature. Sit back, take a sip, and enjoy. This is Cool Coffee with Kansas Principals. Let's get started. John, welcome to Cool Coffee. I appreciate you joining me and working through some of the technological workarounds that we just went through. But John Cannon is here on this fourth episode of Cool Coffee, and we've just started this school year. John, how's your year started so far?
You know, it's gone pretty well. Today is Tuesday, right? Yeah, it's Tuesday. This is our third day of full school, but our fourth day back. So otherwise, it's off to a good start.
That's awesome. And there's always so much preparation that goes into that, and it's crazy how you spend so much time, and then 3 days in, and I find myself standing in the lunchroom. And it's like, oh, it feels like we never left, like we're right back at it all over again.
Yeah. The routine, which I think a lot of people are, they really actually enjoy. It's that routine and structure as we all, kind of endure and go through it, but also kind of enjoy it, or I don't know, it's that familiarity, I guess.
Yeah.
That you do it. I also think about too is like there's nothing like back to school tired either. So
that's accurate. And some of the team meetings I've had with staff, we talked about how we felt at the end of Friday was our first, our first weekend, but 2.5 days in, and a shorter week, but how you feel at the end of that school tired, like you said.
Yeah.
So you are USD 327, Ellsworth Junior High, Senior High. I enjoy hearing everybody's road to the chair, as I call it. 30-second version of just kind of what has led you to where you are at today.
Yeah. So, for me, I guess in terms of teaching, I started teaching in Medicine Lodge, Kansas, at Medicine Lodge Junior Senior High School. I taught history and government, primarily to seniors. And then during that time, I started my master's through Emporia State, which is my alma mater, as you can kind of see in the background over there, for both my master's or my bachelor's and my master's. Did that while I was teaching a full schedule, had 6 preps, which is crazy. And then I didn't think I had enough to do, so they asked me to be junior high athletic director, and that's really where I stepped into educational leadership. And I really enjoyed it. And so initially I wanted to be an athletic director and assistant principal, but my path led me differently. And so my first principal's job, and this is only my second position in 12 years of being a principal, it led me to Lions at USD 405. And I was an elementary principal for a pre-K2 building. So that was a huge jump for me. And then I spent 9 years there, and we transformed the school into a trauma responsive school, and that could be a whole episode by itself. And then now I've switched over in 2022 to this building right now, which is the 712.
Great. Yeah, you mentioned trauma responsive. I made a note of that. Maybe calling you back, come on a different episode. That'd be fascinating and all the more important for sure. You mentioned teaching government and social studies early on. That's my background.
All right.
There's times I really miss it, and one thing I always really enjoyed was election year. And I know, things get charged and all that stuff, but it was just such a really fun time to be in the classroom as I think back. Do you miss those days at all?
I do. I think, now that I'm back into the secondary level, I've really enjoyed that. You talk about election year, my first year teaching, because, I was in the military before that, before I came a teacher or I went to school. My first year was the 08-09 school year. So that was right when the McCain-Obama election. And I was teaching that, and it was really interesting to see and hear kids' perspectives of, why they would vote the way they did and things like that. But yeah, it's missing it absolutely. But I also enjoy it's kind of like my little treat to myself when I can go into my social studies teachers' classrooms when just to pop in, do some walkthroughs and just sit down. Today we had I did that today in my actually my civics and government teachers class, and it was a good conversation.
Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah.
Well, you've been involved, and I'd like to hear about your involvement in KPA, Kansas Principal Association, but this year you are stepping into a new role as the president of the KPA. And
Yeah.
so we'd love to hear just, I guess, first your involvement in KPA over the years and what that is going to look like moving forward.
Yeah. So I've been involved ever since my first year in 2013. My superintendent, who is still currently the superintendent in Lyons, his name's Bill Day. He was a really strong advocate for me of saying you need to be involved. You need to have an opportunity to lead in a different way. You need to be connected because that connectedness will change how you see things and understand how the principalship works. And so I had a really good foundation from him. He was a great mentor. He's a great mentor. And he's like, first thing you got to do is you got to go to the new principals workshop. So I did. It was in Wichita that year, and that was really my first foray into the association. And then since then, I've been a member ever since. And so I mentioned briefly about my trauma responsive path, and that's really kind of how I got into it. I actually wrote a letter that you will see in the under the umbrella in our the USA Kansas, and that kind of outlines that my letter outlines to all the not only KPA members but everyone underneath the umbrella of why it's important to be a part of an association, whichever one yours is, but ours, of course, is KPA. And I really want to make sure that for me, I'm involved. And so from that first year, I really was just trying to make myself available to understand, how can I become a better principal? How can I be involved? And really what KPA, and at that point it was KAESP for me, and that before the merger of KPA or into KPA, that it was my connectedness into it. So I went to every type of professional development I could, anything that was involved with the association. And then when I got into my foray into trauma responsive, I started presenting at KPA, the conferences. I started presenting at USA, and those actually led me into other speaking opportunities about training people on trauma responsive. And so I started doing that. That was actually how I got even a wider connection, a wider network of people. So for me, it was my passion and my training on trauma informed, which then led me to even more places to talk, which then eventually, over time, over 7 years, what happened was for me to be involved with the executive board and now be the president this year. In 2021, you and my peers chose me to be the elementary school principal of the year for 2021, and which was an amazing honor, and that has really blossomed into other things. I think it was 2022 when Kara Lady, the executive director of KPA, asked me, "Hey, John, would you want to be on the executive board?" And I said, "Sure." And I was thinking, and I kind of knew how the board worked a little bit in terms of regions and whatnot, but I was expecting, a regional chair, and she's like, "Oh, I'd like you to be vice president." I was like, "Oh, okay." Well, that was the first year I was actually transferring that summer into my current position. So I needed to talk to my superintendent beforehand and just ask if that was possible. And she's like, her concern was, transitioning from elementary to secondary, are you going to be able to, do that? Because I want you to be able to function and do all those things. And I said, I think so. So since then, I went from last year, I was the president-elect, and then, of course, this year, president.
Yeah, fantastic. It's great when, just like you mentioned, your district being supportive of this. And I think that's great to have, our districts that get behind us for basically professional development. And it's a way to grow as grow as a leader, as a principal. And you mentioned the KPA conference, and I had the opportunity to present last year in November in Wichita, and such a great conference. And I know, that's on the books here in a few months, and
Yep.
just really, it's a conference that's put together by and for principals, and it was so valuable, and it's energizing to go to those things and
Hmm.
to step into different sessions, like what you mentioned and others, and then you mentioned the networking that occurs with that. I mean, that's huge, and then to follow up in the spring with the USA conference as well, and there's just so many opportunities out there. Um, you were mentioning the KPA and kind of its mission, its role, its purpose. For those who might be listening that maybe they're not familiar, they're not familiar with KPA or maybe all that it entails. How would you describe that mission and that role, that purpose of the KPA to that person?
Well, KPA, it's an organization for principals by principals, and I think that's the first thing. Is it's not a subsidiary, even though it kind of is of USA. It's just underneath, but our association is tied to the national associations, and that's really important. But really, our organization is committed to educational excellence, and it's really with the idea of we're creating lifelong successful people, and our role is really then to support principals through the development and the development of professional learning, and it's really optimized by collaboration, leadership, and networking, and more importantly, service. Because we're in a service-based industry, and that's the way we have to look at things. So I think those founding principles that KPA really is based on is exactly what our profession and the principalship is meant to be. It's meant to be based on leadership. It's meant to be on networking because, like I said in my article, that's one of the things I've talked about is one of the most endearing things, and why I continue to have a membership in KPA. Why I think, and I'm such an ardent proponent for it, is the network that I have of other principals who have gone through the same things that I have, or or are experiencing the same things that I am, and what I do and what they do for me in terms of supporting me, listening, venting, and those are transferable in either way, from me to them or them to me, and I think that's incredibly important. Because I know for us, our position, whether you're in a small district like mine or a big district like yours, we're still dealing with some of the exact same things, and the chair can be isolating, and you can feel like you're on an island, even though you may be one of many, and like in the large district in terms of being an administrator, or one of few, like in my district, and we're in Kansas terms, we're still a mid-sized district, being a 3A.
Right.
But for a lot of our friends who are in 1As, you may be one of two administrators in a district, and sometimes even maybe the case of being one of one. And so, if you're a principal and you have, you're seeking for, some type of connection, KPA is the place to be, and that's where you can really get it.
Yeah. Um, you mentioned just that networking, and my year of being on the board, serving with you, and you mentioned our different district sizes and things, but one of the things I've enjoyed the most is just one, connecting with people that I never would have connected with otherwise. And in some ways, you mentioned the size of the district I'm in. There are a lot of principals, and there's a lot of networking within the district, but I've had so much value. I've seen so much value in the connections at KPA conference or USA, and through our meetings throughout the year. Sitting down with colleagues from across the state, and like you said, what we're experiencing is very similar.
Oh, yeah.
Size of the school does not matter with much of what we do, as far as the problems that present themselves
Yeah.
at our desk, and it's there's a certain level of comfort with that. And frankly, just growth. You getting a different perspective from another part of the state. It's been so valuable. And doing these podcasts is just for me personally another extension of getting to know and meet and talk with more people. But I think that's part of what the drive is for me to try to do this and get voices out there. Is it doesn't have to be a super lonely job, and I hope through this that people who listen to it will hear from all across our state and beyond. I mean, the principal chair it's a unique job, but there's a lot of things that come across our desk that are very, very similar challenges that we're all facing.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's the connecting factor, is that there are shared experiences, no matter the size, no matter where the location is in the state. We're always going to be dealing with upset parents. We're always going to be dealing with faculty and students and boards of education and all these other things, all these facets that we are all having within terms of a shared connection or shared experience. And I think those are the underlying factors that's what KPA is there really for, is it's to understand, like, yes, I am experiencing the exact same thing or very similar to you, even though we may be somewhere across the state and different sizes of schools and districts and things like that, but they're the same. And if you don't have those connections, and if you are like in a small district like mine, and you may be one of few administrators, if you don't have that connection, it really does and can be isolating. Like I said, it can be just so um, it can be disheartening, and that's not what our job's about. Our job is about connection, and I think that's the key, and that's why KPA is such a valuable part of my professional, and I would assume yours too, is your professional growth. So it's just crucial. I really do think it is, and I think if you're not connected, and if you know people who aren't connected, aren't members, and aren't, and really, they say I don't see the benefit of being a KPA member. One, it's too expensive, or all these other things, but you should really look at this as an investment in you, right? And you're worth it. You're worth the investment in yourself, and I think that's something that too is educators in general are very selfless people. We're helping raise people's kids every single day of our life, and that's by choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that sometimes we don't we defer our own care, and I think that sometimes that's it can become unhealthy. And I can tell you from personal experiences, if you don't allow those things to take hold, then you can really um, have a hard time,
Yeah.
because it's a
Yeah.
hard job.
It's a hard job. And you mentioned the personal connections, and you hit on a point there. We're in the people business. We're very, we probably, most of us were teachers that got into administration, so very oriented around people. But then at the same time, like you mentioned, it can be very lonely. And for people who are working with people often, and that it can be a lonely position, yet we're in the people business. That can be a
Yeah,
grind, and so that connection is all the more important, because sometimes you just need to pick up the phone and call. And that's one of the advice I give. I have shadows, admin shadows, or prospective admin, is like, look, I'm not making sold decisions just solely on me. There's a lot of people I call, and they call me, and we rely on that. And
yep,
we need to be non-competitive with each other, because things come up, and we need to be able to have someone to reach out to.
yeah. It really is that. And again, I have, I've created lifelong friendships through my interaction with the association, and so, and again, it's based off the principalship, but again, it's a community. And I think that's the thing, is if people don't see the value in that, then and you can't force someone to see value. They have to experience it. And I think that's the other thing too, is give yourself that opportunity to do so. Let yourself have that opportunity. It's a tough balance, but in terms of, I know I have to keep working. I know I have to be at the school. I have to do these type of things, but I also know that if I don't invest in myself in terms of my own personal growth, how am I going to be able then to grow my school and move us forward? because that's ultimately your job, right? So,
Right.
it's crucial.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that invest in you is really a good way to put it. There is a lot on the horizon for KPA, a quick scope throughout the year. Any events you'd like to highlight or mention?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the best things, and I kind of mentioned it before, is and I would say is that it's definitely gotten better over the years. And I know underneath the leadership of Kara, she's done a great job of trying to create a system where you start to build that network, and you do that with the principal new principals meetings. And those are really, there's two in-person places where you can do it. They meet twice a year, one at the beginning of the year, one at the end of the year, and those are in Topeka and Goddard. But then they also have multiple dates in terms of Zooms where you're meeting almost every month or every other month. I think it's almost every month. And you have that time where there's topics that they're talking about, and you can have time to ask questions and to get feedback from others. I've been on a couple different panels with that. I was on one last year and just talking about, those principals who had gone through their first year and experienced all these different things, but still had questions of how have you handled this, or have you experienced this, or what do you do in this aspect. And it's always really refreshing, and it makes me reflect a lot about my practice, and not only what I've done and what I can do and where I want to go. And it's just really interesting, and I think that's one. So new principles is one. Next is, you invest in yourself, but one of the things I think KPA does really, really well too is they also offer that for your secretaries. So on October 2nd, at the Drury in Wichita, we'll have the secondary secretaries workshop, and that's from 9 to 2. I've had numerous secretaries throughout my 12 years, and every one, if when I get a new one, and then I offer them every year is to have my secretaries go. And every year I ask, did you find something valuable from that? And they're like, oh yeah. And then during their evaluation, I've had numerous people say, can I continue to go? And I'm like, absolutely, because they find value in that. And then, of course, the big hitter and is the KPA conference, November 6th and 7th, back at the Drury in Wichita. We've got really good, top-notch keynote speakers this year coming in. Weston Kasinik, I think that's how you say his name. It's a little bit different, but he's really, really good. He's an administrator and a really good keynote speaker. And then our closing one is Jim Wickman, and we've had, he's going to be great as well. But we've had really good presenters. A couple of years ago, we had Joe Sanfilippo, we had Jimmy Casas. I mean, we try as a board and as a KPA organization to really bring in those people who have done it, been there, done that, and give us, some inspiration of how you can become a better leader. And I think that's something, again, that's really good. And I know that's during dead week for a lot of us high school principals and things like that. And again, I just ask people, think of this as an investment in you, right? It's for principals by principals, and I think it's important. So, it's 2 days, and it's a good opportunity for you to get out of the building, have a quick little break right before we go into the holiday season, and to really kind of fill your cup in terms of your position as a principal. So.
Yeah, uh, that was such a great conference last year that I attended. I was fortunate to present with another principal buddy here of mine, and just a really great conference. And I couldn't recommend it enough. And I've told a lot of people about it and brought
Yeah.
the itinerary home or back to show, and it's really great. So.
Mhm.
I got a couple things here that kind of some maybe quick hitters here. I'm gonna get your thoughts.
Yeah.
You last year you filled out a form that was put out there, kind of a feature principal during Principals Month of October. But you
Yep.
said your favorite quote. I want to read this quote, and I went back and looked. I really liked it. You said, "If you accept the call to leadership, you must be willing to be misunderstood, criticized, opposed, accused, and even rejected." And I'm not sure who said that. I didn't see that, but you listed that as your favorite quote, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. You and why you put that.
So I'm a big quote guy. If I could turn the computer, because I got everything connected, It's on my wall. It's right here. And so the one thing you have to understand is when you take this role on, and I think that's, you can go through schooling, you go through all these things, but and even as a teacher, you experience different things and things like that are involving students and staff and families and community and stuff like that. But once you sit in the chair and you're in the position, and then you're the head of the school, you are the representative, you are the face. Um, it brings things that will challenge you. You'll be criticized, you'll be misunderstood, you'll be accused, you'll even be rejected. And you have to understand that that's the weight of the position. But I also look at that and I say that is the reality of what you have to deal with as a leader. But at the same time, don't allow those things to then change your focus. We hear a lot about your why, and I think that's a really good guide on, but you also have to have an understanding of yourself too. You've taken that foray, you've taken that leap into leadership, and knowing that, people are going to they're going to, not like you. You will get called names. You will be isolated. That is the one thing within our position. You live in a glass house, right? And if you live in a small community like mine, or you move to one from a big district to a small district, or and maybe not necessarily from a small to a big, but definitely when you live in a small district, people know who you are, and you don't know them unless you're from that area. They will come up to you at the grocery store and say, "Hey, you're the new principal, aren't you?" Yeah, and you've got to turn it on, even though you're in your shorts and a t-shirt and flip-flops, right? I'm just here to
Right.
get a jug of milk, but um, that's the thing that you have to do, and you have to understand that that's the weight when you accept that call um, to the principalship.
Right. I really like that quote. When I read that, I wanted to bring it up. And you mentioned earlier that island feel that it can sometimes bring, and that quote really is talking about that. And I like what you mentioned, whether it's your why or what has your focus in the job, but staying true to that. I think that's so important, because that if that doesn't waver, then that's what helps you sleep at night. There's a lot of decisions and things, and I always tell my staff, I'm not going to be perfect. I'm going to make mistakes, but and for all of us, if we're trying to do the best we can, we stay focused on our purpose, and trying to fulfill that. Then that's all we can do.
Right. One of the things I always talk about with my staff is giving grace. We give grace all the time, but sometimes we don't receive that grace in return. And to me, that connects to the idea that giving compassion when it seems least deserving is a big portion of our job, and that took a long time for me to understand. And it's just something you have to change your mindset about. you know at the end of the day, when parents are upset with you, they're just advocating for their kid. They want their kid to be able to access their education to the fullest it can be. And sometimes they may be misled or misunderstood, and that's where you have to communicate, and hopefully come to some form of consensus or understanding. But you just it's a process. And that's one of the things I always tell going back to new principals, is it's a process. You will grow, and that first year you will feel like you're a brand new teacher again, just in a different concept. You really do. And that's the truth. And even if when you change, like I did, I was principal for 9 years, and then I switched back to secondary. And my first year, I'm like, man, okay, it's different. It's
Yeah.
different. So
Yeah, that first year from classroom to admin, I tell new principals all the time, it's a career change. You're still in education, but it's a career change. It's a mind shift, and there, you don't want to take your lumps, but you figure some things out the hard way, and it can
yep.
move pretty quick at first. And we hear a lot about the pause button, things like that, but it can go quick. All right, real quickly, I'm going to bring this up. You also fill this out, but I'm going to ask. You said if anybody was to play you in a movie, you listed two people.
Uh-huh.
You said Tom Hanks and or Weird Al Yankovic. And
Yeah,
so
Weird
I
Al, man.
thought, man, that's quite the broad the spectrum of actors or performers. You care to speak to that at all?
Absolutely. Tom Hanks is, I mean, he can play anyone. He's such an amazing actor. I just love most of the things that he does in terms of what he chooses. So I think, he could do that endearing part of our job and why the passion and why we do what we do. And that's of course because of kids. Um, and then Weird Al is just me. I'm a weird guy. I know I am. I've been weird since I was little, and Weird Al is my kind of humor. I've always liked him. I've seen him multiple times in concert, and um, he's just a great guy. The dude's a genius, but he's great, and I'm weird. He's weird, and he would be great
That,
to
that's
play me.
perfect. No, I just wanted to bring that up. I saw that. I'm like, wow, that's just really quite the
Polar
imbalance.
opposites, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, I want to give you a chance, Ellsworth Junior High, Senior High, USD 327, to brag about your school, your people. Tell us all about Ellsworth.
Yeah. Ellsworth's on the move. When I came, we also got our new superintendent or a new superintendent, and then so there was a new elementary principal. So there was a lot of turnover. And one of the things I appreciate about the direction we're moving is, we're growing together. Our motto is better together, striving for excellence. And we look at that, and even though we're in a small rural community, we have a lot of things that are going for us. We have a lot of industry here. We have Great Plains Manufacturing. We have a local steelwork company called Myco. We have another company that is an international valve company for water, any type of valves, industrial size and things like that, called Cashco. And then, of course, we have the Ellsworth Correctional Facility for Department of Corrections for the state of Kansas. So we've got a lot of things going on here, plus all the farming and ranching that we have here in the beautiful Smoky Hills. But within our building, one of the things I came in is uh, the status quo had been here for quite some time, very embedded, very comfortable, because that's the way the community is. It's very traditional, very comfortable. And I think the one thing I appreciate what we're doing right now is we're pushing those boundaries, because we asked parents, we asked the community. We had over 5 to 6 listening sessions with over 1,200 people within the community came to these things and listened, and we asked questions. What do you want your students to be able to do? What is important to you? How do you want this community to grow? And so we took all that data, we comprised it, and we've created a new strategic theme and new strategic outlook and plan, and that has also created a different way of how we're doing things. So um, we've got so many good things going on for us. One of the things that we had, like everyone else, is we through attrition and just not being able to hire people, we were able to, or we had a staff that was really reduced to basically bare bones. We had numerous people teaching multiple different subjects, not just preps, but subjects. And one of the first things I did when I came, I said, "Hey, what do we need to do?" And they're like, "We need staff." So that was one of the first things that I tried to do to come in and is just to fill that back up. And so in the last 3 years, I have hired, man, I got to think here, 23 people, and some of those are just fills in the staff, but also created some positions as well. We created a computer science position. We created a career and technical education coordinator position, and that's totally changed because um, our coordinator is Carl Don Stover, and she's an amazing young administrator. And she was our agricultural teacher. And if you don't know anything, Ellsworth is known for our FFA in the last 10 years. And it's all because Carl Don. Multiple state championships. I think we had 4 in a row. We've had 9 straight 3-star national chapters. So that's the highest ranking you can get. And so we're a powerhouse. And, we have in a school of 302, 7 through 12, we have about 80, 85 kids in FFA. And so it's just, that's one of the things within endearing within our school. And they're super involved. It's an amazing program. But we also have a really staunch Stuco. We have our Stuco advisor she was the Stuco advisor for the state of Kansas last year, and our kids are amazing. They're hyper involved with everything we do, and they're just a great asset for us. But in terms of more than anything, we've been lucky enough to hire amazing people, and I know that sometimes is extremely hard, because I can remember when I started being a principal, 12 years ago, you would have 15, 20 applications for me, then it was like a first grade or kindergarten position. And by the time I left Lions, we had openings and we had maybe two.
Right.
And so that's been a challenge for us. So when I say that I've hired 23 people in the last 3 years, and that we only had two people, one was a retirement and the other one was of a situation where the person had a really good offer, and I couldn't blame them for them, but we're not having turnover. And so it's all about the culture in which you create and what you're trying to drive towards. And so we have our motto. We know that we're better together. We know that we need each other to make us stronger. And I think that's something, again, that Ellsworth is we're in that moment right now. We're moving forward, and where it had been the status quo for quite some time. So for us, it's encouraging, but it's hard work. But in the end, we know it's what's best for kids. So that's why we do it.
Yeah. That's great. And yeah, you talked about retention, and that speaks a lot to you, to your school, your community, that you've got people you're hiring and they're staying, and that retention level is high. And I think about some of the conversation we've had here today, the work you're doing now, leading the KPA, all the grind, the isolation, the quote that we talked about, and what that can be for principals. You mentioned how hard it can be. So I appreciate the work that you're doing now through the KPA, because ultimately I think that helps with retention of principals. We need good principals, and it can be really, it's harder and harder. Our positions also are harder to fill across the state too, and that's a reality. And so I think that's what the KPA is all about as well, is providing that network, that support, the PD, and just that encouragement, and just feeling energized by a lot of the opportunities that are out there. So I appreciate what you're going to do with that here this year. So
yeah, our biggest thing is we want to have active membership. We want to be able to meet, and I know that's something that we're going to talk about as a board, of saying, how can we get more principals engaged in our association? We have a great number of members, but we need to be able to engage them as a community of principals. And I think that's going to be one of the things that I'm going to advocate for our board, is just, how can we get engaged? How can we engage our members for them to go, oh, this is meaningful. Rather than just being a member and I get the benefits and it's great to network, which is the reason why they should be joining. But how do we engage them? How do we enrich them? How do we grow as a community of principals? And I think that's the goal ultimately, is how do you create an engaged membership? And I think that's the biggest thing that I'm going to be asking of the regional chairs this year, is how can you engage? And if that means that I need to come out and help in that, or be a part of that, absolutely. And I know my superintendent has been very willing to allow me to do this, because it's a time commitment, right?
Sure. Right.
But at the same time, I think that's that's how we grow the association. So.
Well, John, I know it's a super busy time of year. You're just getting the school year underway and spending the time here with me to hear broadcasts across the state here soon. Just really appreciate your time, and I want to wish you well on another great school year. And I look forward. I'll be seeing you here soon. In Topeka, I think.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. September 20th.
Yeah. So appreciate it, and
yeah.
Yeah, have a great rest of your week. Oh, one more thing. Go ahead.
I've got one quote, and I think this is something because it kind of ties into what we're talking about. And again, I have it on my door because when I saw it, I was like, "Oh man, that is exactly what our job is about." Is the quote is from Ray Radunsky. He's a teacher, and he says, "Be consistent but flexible. Love them unconditionally, but hold them accountable. Give them voice, but be the leader." To me, that is exactly what the principalship's about. You know, being consistent, but understanding that you have to be flexible, knowing that you have to love your people, but make sure that you hold them accountable. And then more importantly, make them participants in your leadership, but be the leader. One of the things that Admiral McRaven, who his book right here, it's called The Wisdom of the Bullfrog. And one of the things he talks about is when you're the leader, of course, he's talking about the Navy. I'm a Navy vet. And he's talking about you have to be the leader. You have to be the one. If you're in that position, you have to grab the helm. That's the thing. We steer the ship. You're driving the ship. And he says, grab it and drive it. And so that's kind of where I'm at is with this is, it can be isolating. It can be intimidating. But you're there for a reason. They chose you, right? They chose you. And by they, the board of education, the other administrators, your superintendent, they chose you. So be that leader. Be that leader that you said you were in that interview, right? So that's my last little piece of nugget of wisdom.
That's great. In that book, I just typed it in. I'll have that in the show notes for if you're listening and wondering what book that is. I'll have a link there and you can pull it up and take a look at it. But well, hey, John, thanks again. I appreciate all your time and wish you all the best. And I look forward to seeing you here soon.
Absolutely, man. We'll see you.
All right. Take care.
Mm-hmm.
Check the notes section for more information on this episode and to learn more about the KPA and its mission to develop and support all principals through optimized learning, collaborative leadership, networking, and service. Be sure to check back in for our next episode and spread the word about Cool Coffee with Kansas Principals. Catch you next time.